Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are going to discuss about ethical issues in research. When you want to collect data, when you want to write a research, how ethical you should be to avoid any unbiased or unethical behavior in your research. In our previous lecture, we have discussed about sampling techniques, and we basically try to understand the whole methodology of sampling and various sampling techniques. So before we start ethical issue, I just want to summarize the previous two lectures and then we will start with our today's lecture. So in sampling, and while we start understanding sampling, we studied that sampling techniques depend on research question and research objective. The kind of research question that your research want to answer or the objectives that you have fixed for your research gives you choice of your research methodology or sampling technique. And the factor that affect sample size include confidence that you need to establish your findings, accuracy required for your findings, and collection of data, and likely categories of analysis. What kind of analysis you basically want? Is it descriptive? Is it explorative? Is it exploratory? What kind of a data analysis you basically want to conduct for your research? These few points you have to keep in mind while you're deciding about your sampling technique. When you are understanding that this kind of data needs you have to answer your research questions or to meet your research objectives, then you will be in a position to say that if this is the kind of data, you can say something with confidence, your results kind of accurate or more robust, and you will be in a position to analyze data according to what is your analytical needs. Also, we have discussed about probability sampling, which requires a sampling framework, and it can be time consuming. When a sampling framework is not possible or very difficult, what we do is non-probability sampling. And we have discussed in detail what is non-probability sampling, what is probability sampling, what are their various ways of conducting probability and non-probability sampling, what are their advantages and disadvantages and all these things. So many research projects use a combination of sampling techniques. So either you use probability sampling, and within probability sampling you combine one or two techniques, or in non-probability sampling you combine one or the other technique to collect your data. And all choices in the end we discuss that depends on the ability to gain access to organization. Do you have access for the organization you want to collect data? If you have access to that, for example, you want to collect data for microcredit, thus banks allows you to enter and ask questions that you want to ask. And today we are discussing about these things, that when you are entering in an organization to collect data, what are the ethical issues that you have to keep in your mind. And also in sampling technique, we have discussed in detail this table one by one, and I'm just going to summarize it here by saying that sampling is divided into probability and non-probability sampling, and we have just discussed that probability sample need sampling framework, while non-probability is without sampling framework. And within probability sampling we have simple random, we have stratified, we have simple random, we have stratified, and we have systematic, we have cluster sampling, and we have multi-stage sampling. So simple random and systematic I have grouped together because they are kind of similar, but the only difference between systematic and simple random is that in simple random you select your sample randomly by generating random numbers, maybe using Excel random number generators, and in systematic sample you basically give unique number to each case or element in your sample, and based on that then you apply simple random sampling technique, you get your data. Stratified random sample, we have already discussed that you divide your sample into stratas, and based on the strata you do simple random or systematic random sampling technique to collect data. Then in cluster we have also discussed that you group them differently, you make clusters of each group, and out of those clusters you select few based on simple random sampling, and from then you collect data. And multi-stage sampling is basically combination of either cluster or stratified, and within that it's combination of systematic or simple random sampling. And in non-probability sampling we have also discussed quota sampling, we have also discussed snowball sampling, we have discussed about convenience sampling, purposive sampling, self-selection, heterogeneous homogeneous sampling, we have discussed about extreme and typical case, and we have discussed about critical case. So this is how we have covered all the basics of probability and non-probability sampling. So for example, in snowball we have studied in non-probability sampling that you have to choose one or two case or element from your population, and based on that you get more information about your interviewee, and then from there you get some contacts or some details, and then you go there, and this process goes on until you collect a large sample size that is relevant for your data analysis and all. And this is how snowball sampling move. And I give you an example of reference review of literature in which we have to have a snowballing, that we will start taking one paper, and then in the end of this paper we have bibliography or references, and from references we try to find some other linked research or paper that is relevant to that, and that goes on. Or also we can use experts and their emails to get some data, and this is how we do snowball sampling. We started with understanding sampling, why it is important, what is sampling framework. We also talked about response rate, we also talk about what kind of sampling methodology we use, why we use that, and then we have discussed all this in detail. This was all about when you want to collect first-hand information, or we call primary data. And we also have another lecture on secondary data. Why I am discussing ethical issue now and then we will discuss secondary data? Because ethical issues are more important when it comes to collecting first-hand information and primary data. So what is the problem when you start with ethical issues in your research? First thing is gaining access. So access and ethics goes together. What kind of access do you have? Is that ethical or not? So for example, simply understanding ethical issue is that if you are moving in rural areas of Pakistan, if you are moving in urban slums of Pakistan and you saw some exciting things happening in front of you and you want to have photo of that, and if you uninformed those who were photographed and you publish that photograph somewhere else, you have to consider that that is going to be an unethical thing, because your subject does not know that their photo is used for one or the other purpose. So there is kind of intellectual property right thing for the things that they have in their possession. So if you are taking a photo or if you are quoting somebody's words, you have to inform him or her that these are your words, I understand him that way and I am interpreting or quoting them in my research. So this is how you can be ethically correct. So gaining access is one of the important thing. Its ability to obtain both primary and secondary data, that will depend on your gaining access to an appropriate source or sources, whether you have access to one or the other source for gaining primary data or not, or gaining secondary data or not. If you have access, that's wonderful. If you don't have access, then you have to think twice how you are going to get data or how you are going to collect data to answer your research questions and objectives. So level of access can be physical, Access can be difficult. There are gatekeepers or brokers who control research access and make the final decision. So for example, if World Bank or FAO or any other international organization in collaboration with one or the other institute in Pakistan collect data, they have this memorandum of understanding or agreement that unless they are in a position to explore the data fully, the data will not be accessible to other researchers. So this is how they kind of perform a role of gatekeepers, and that's where, or brokers, or if you want to use their data, you have to pay for that. Same is the case with Pakistan Bureau of Statistics. They collect data for Pakistan at national and provincial level, and to certain extent also at district level, and if you want to use that data, you have to go through institutional way. You have to put an application, and then you can get access only by paying certain amount of money that they require. And that's how they play a role of gatekeeper or broker when you need research access or data access at primary or secondary level. Same is the case with Pakistan Social Living Standard Measurement Survey. When you want to use that survey to do any kind of analysis or research, you have to have a written permission from Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, as well as you have to get data by paying some amount of money to them. Access may be denied because lack of perceived value. Maybe they said that because you're not going to use the data in a way that it should be used, so you cannot have access to data. Potential sensitivity, maybe it is confidential, maybe it is competitive, maybe it is undesirable public attention. So these are the things that one has to keep in their mind when they are talking about the sensitivity of data. For example, when you want to have access to voter lists, that's going to be a sensitive issue, that whether it is available to a common man who want to do research or not. Same is the case when you want to see people's perception about parties. For example, this is election year in Pakistan, so if you want to see people's perception about various parties, that's going to be sensitive, confidential thing. So some of the things you can publish, the others you definitely have to take care of the level of sensitivity. Continuing access, first steps, and then try to get further information. First step is that you start getting access to, you know somebody can help you, you go there, you ask him or her, and then you start getting access to data. Gatekeeper and those in direct control of the information are different. So maybe Pakistan Bureau of Statistics headquarters have the gatekeeping behavior, but data is with somebody else. So in that way you can have access to, or you need to have various steps where you can have continuous access. So you have to talk about data with Pakistan Bureau of Statistics and also with the agency that is having the data. Cognitive access, are you allowed to have a proper sample? If you need a proper sampling framework, methodology used to collect data and all that, can you have access to it or not? Or set of secondary data to answer your research question? Or the secondary data that you need, are you in a position, for example, you ask Pakistan Bureau of Statistics that to run a regression at time series for GDP and some other variables in Pakistan, you need a data of at least 30 years. But if they allow you access to 25 years, will you be in a position to answer your research question? That you have to understand when you're talking about cognitive access. Strategies to gain access. What strategies you can use or a researcher can use to have access to data? Number of strategies that will help get physical and cognitive access. So these may be personal entry to an organization. Personally you go there in an organization, and that's very important, that in some cases or in most of the cases you have to go to that organization personally, and then you start asking people how to get access to this or that kind of data, where to intervene, what kind of process is there, how much charges are there, how do I apply to get access to that particular data. So your wish to get personal entry to an organization, so you must be willing to enter into that particular organization for which you need data. Become familiar with the organization, try to understand what kind of organization is this, what kind of work they do, how much human resources they have, what kind of departments they have, what are their working environment, especially their working timings. If you go, for example, in an office after 4:30 or 5 and they are closing at that time, it's difficult to talk to them because it's their time to leave back home. So becoming familiar with the organization before contacting it. Before contacting the organization, try to understand what kind of organization it is. What is their opening hours? When do they work? Are they open on Saturday or not? Things like that. When you understand that and you are willing to visit organization, then allow yourself sufficient time. Make sure that don't pose deadlines, timelines based on access to data. You can't say yourself that within 7 days you can have access to data because it's in somebody else's hand. So you have to understand the sensitivity of the issue and provide yourself for your research a sufficient time to get access to data using existing and new contacts. Sometimes introductory letters and establish your credibility. Letter from your institute can also help you to get access to data within ministries, within government bodies, within other organizations where data requirement needs formality. So to cover that formality, what you can do is you ask your organization or you ask your university or department or your supervisor who is supervising you to get access to that data, that he has or she has to write a letter that you are a responsible researcher for this or that research question or objective. You need this kind of data. And organization should have to provide that data so that you can complete your analysis. And this is how you can get access to, or at least kind of process can be started. So try to use existing and new contacts. If you have any existing contact in the organization or those who know somebody within organization can help you find access to data. Clear account of purpose and type of access required. Tell them what kind of data, why and how you require. So if you need GDP data, for how many years you need it. If you need credit data for Agriculture Development Bank of Pakistan, for how many years, for what purposes that loan is disbursed, and all that thing that you need, you have to inform them clearly so that when you get access to data, you didn't miss any information that is required to answer your research questions and objective. Overcoming organizational concerns such as confidentiality and data anonymity. So you have to understand that organization have some concerns showing that your data, once given it to you, should not become public. You make it confidential, you remain or you keep it anonymous so that no one can misuse the data set that you have access to. What you can do, you basically ask organization to give you data, and within your letter also state that the data will be used in confidence and anonymously for the research purpose. It is allowed to get access to that data, and if that is not the case, then you are coming under an unethical issue. If you're sharing that data with others without permission of the department or organization, that's going to be an unethical thing. So this is how access to or gaining data is linked to ethical issues. Highlighting possible benefits to the organization. You can also tell organization that what kind of benefits organization get when you are going to use the data for that particular organization, and you are going to analyze the data for your particular research objectives and research questions of your research proposal for your dissertation. For example, if you want to see the marketing or advertisement campaign and its impact on sales, so you can tell a branded company or an organization who is selling that particular product that how marketing tactics can increase your sale for a particular product, or how improved marketing can have impact on your positive impact on your sale. If this is the case, organization or company who is working on marketing might have some impact. So it's better in that case that you have to get access to somebody who is already in marketing department or related to marketing department, so that you can make your case valid and easily understandable for the person who is working for that particular organization. And that's how you can have use of your contacts or new contacts within organization to get access to data. Using suitable language, be polite, be smooth, be confident when you want to ask somebody that you need data for this or that purpose of your research. Use suitable language. Don't be authoritative, be simple and polite so that you can get access to data. Facilitating replies, if they ask you whether you'll provide the results of your report or not, don't say them no, because you're using their data, you're working on their organizations, or your research might be helpful or may be helpful for their organization, let's say in near future. They might be also looking at something like that kind of solution which your research is trying to explore. So that research is also helpful for the organization you want to have access to data for. So this is how your facilitating replies can help them to understand the importance of your research and research objectives, and the way you try to answer your research question using the data from the organization, and how it can help organization to improve working. Developing access incrementally. If you have access or continuous or cognitive access, then try to increase your access with the passage of time. If you have access to, let's say, 2-3 variables, but you are interested in one or the other variable which is not mentioned when you write in a letter, or which is not mentioned in your proposal, but when you come across the data, you have understand, or you have kind of developed an understanding that this variable can also have some impact on it, or this kind of data can also have some significant or influencing results for your research objective and research question. So you can have access to that data also, provided you remain smooth, calm and polite when you're talking to persons in or people in organization you want to get access to the data for. Being open to serendipitous events. So it's basically that if you can have access or difficult access to data, for example, if you go to an office, somebody claimed that he or she will give you data tomorrow or day after tomorrow, and you went there and they are not in the office, don't be panic, because this is the kind of thing that you have to politely manage so that you can have access to data within organization by one or the other way. Why do we have to act ethically? That's when you know what kind of data you need, when you know what kind of sampling technique you are going to use, and when you know all these things, you have to understand that you have to act ethically. And before that, you have to understand why do we have to act ethically. Cooper and Schindler defined ethics as norms or standards of behavior that guide moral choices about our behavior and our relationship with others. It's simple ethic that we apply anywhere in our social setup in daily life. So whenever you meet somebody, you say hello and hi, you say salam, you shake hand, or whatever kind of cultural norms or values are there, you definitely try to be as ethically correct as possible so that you can not be unethical. And that will help you especially in research, because it relates to the question about how we formulate and clarify our research. Research ethics relate to the questions about how we formulate and clarify our research. So when you understand the ethical issues in your research, then you will be in a better position to design and formulate your research. And also you will be in a good position to clarify your research objectives and research questions. So this is very important to have ethical consideration in your research. Secondly, this means that the way you design your research is both methodologically sound and morally defensible to all those involved. So you have to be safe and secure on moral grounds, and it is also defensible in front of those who are also involved in the research you are conducting. So one thing, or two things that are very important is that research ethics relate to the questions about formulation and clarifying your research, and secondly, the way you design your research should be or could be methodologically sound and morally defendable in front of others. For example, if you're collecting data and you're asking questions from people, then you have to show them or you have to share with them the research outcomes of your research project, so that they know what they have said have interpreted in a nice way or not. And if you have claimed somebody's photo or if you have taken somebody's consent, then definitely if you want to hide or show their names, you have to give ethical consideration by asking them whether you can show their name on report or not, whether you can show their photo on report or not. And if this is not the case, you have to seek permission. If they say no, you're not allowed to do that, and based on that, if they don't allow and you do that, that become unethical, and then your methodology or design of your research, number one, is not morally correct, number two, it's not defendable in front of those who are involved. So for example, if I am interviewed by somebody and I have asked that don't show my name, what it is shown in the report, then the report you cannot defend in front of me. I mean, I didn't allow you to show my name. So on what basis you have given my name in the report? So these are the ethical consideration, or why you have published my photo. So these are the ethical consideration that one has to keep in the mind before designing or before collecting data or before publishing the research report also. So when we discussed why do we act ethically, and we saw that we need two strong bases for that to act ethically. We have also understood the definition of ethics. Now we will see what are the two views on ethics. Number one, what is morally defensible behavior, as researchers will be affected by broader social norms of behavior. And what are the social norms? These are the behavior that society or a small group expects from the people. Nonetheless, there is a bandwidth of possible ethical positions. So a social setup has their own social norms. Within that social norm, does a researcher behaves ethically or not? That's one of the very important thing. And if the researcher behaves ethically or unethically, has implication for the research on moral grounds and on designing and formulating research, and when it has to defend when the research project or paper or dissertation is published. So first view about ethics is on deontological view, and the other is teleological view. Deontological view says the ends of research never justifies unethical behavior. It is close to Kant's categorical imperative: always act so as to treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of another, as an end in itself, never as means only. So don't use human beings to fulfill your objectives. Treat them always so that your objectives can be fulfilled by one or the other means, and your research help them understand their own issues and their solutions as their ends. So there must be a distinction between means and end. So human beings should not be or could not be or may not be used as means, but your research should be an end product for them so that they can help find some solutions for that. Do to others as you would have them do to you. You behave in a way that you expect others to behave with you. So be polite, be smooth, try to give good queries and good answers to the use of their time when you're using their time. Definitely when you have a questionnaire you want to fill it up, you definitely need few hours or minutes or something like that. So everybody's time is important and precious. So if that is the case, Are you giving them proper treatment? Are you smoothly or ethically or behaving in a nice manner? If this is the case, definitely you expect others to behave with you nicely. That's also true for others, that others also expect that you behave them with nice behavior and ethical behavior. Teleological view: the end serves by your research justify the means, weighing benefits and cost, but for whom, that you have to understand. However, if it is a matter of life and death, maybe the means become more acceptable than otherwise. So you have to understand the cost benefit analysis of what kind of costs you have, what kind of benefits you can get when you want to collect data, when you want to have access to, and you want to build your network within organization so that you can have access to data and you can behave ethically. Then you have to also understand what kind of costs and benefits involved while collecting that kind of particular data, or that gaining that kind of access to data. And this is how teleological way of thinking or ethics is different from deontological view of ethics. Ethical issues across the stages of research project. We have seen that research projects have various stages, and based on that, most of the stages or every stage have a different or difficult kind of ethical issues or problems. Privacy of possible and actual participant. So are you in a position to ensure privacy of the participant? Voluntary nature of participation and the right to withdraw. So participation must be voluntary. Voluntary in the sense that if people want to interview, if they want to answer the questions that you want to ask, if they want to sit in the focus groups by themselves, then it's fine. And if they want to leave at any point of time, you have to allow them, because the entry was voluntary. Consent and possible deception of participant. So you have to get consent of the participant. Don't deceive them by saying that let's have a meeting, let's have a cup of tea, and then during that you ask questions and get their answer and report them in your research. So you have to get their consent. You have to clearly tell them that we are doing a research, we are doing a research project which has this or that kind of objective, which is trying to answer this question or that question, and based on that we want to get some information from you and we want to ask some questions. Are you ready to answer these questions or not? Are you willing to answer these questions or not? And if the willingness is shown, then you will be in a position to go and get information. So consent is most necessary thing rather than deception. Confidentiality of data provided by individuals or identifiable participant and their anonymity. Data must be confidential, not showing, for example, their names, not showing the photos of the respondents, and anonymity of the participants. So you don't have to tell that this or that kind of person in that particular organization has given you this or that kind of particular information. So anonymity of individuals and confidentiality of data. You don't have to show data to everybody who is not allowed to have access to data. Access to data is one of the very important thing, and that comes also under ethical consideration. Reactions of participants to the way in which you seek to collect data. How do people react when you want to collect data? Analyze and report your data, including embarrassment, stress, discomfort, pain and harm. It's very simple that you have to analyze and report data without including any personal bias in it. If you're not comfortable with the research results, if they make you embarrassed, or if you are discomfort with the results, please try to explain why that data doesn't behave the way they should be, or why it is according to the research objective, why it is not according to the research objectives, because this or that kind of objective might have theoretical linkages, but in real life it's going to be dynamic and changing. So reactions of a participant should be included and informed so that other researchers who want to conduct research on that particular topic must know that what kind of question makes your respondent feel embarrassed, how they get stressed if you kind of asking repetitive questions, how do they get discomfort, pain or harm. So try to avoid any of these things through your behavior and objectivity of you as a researcher. Your behavior and your objectivity makes sense. You have to understand that you are there to ask questions based on your research objectives and research questions. Rather than discussing them with politics and other social issues, it's better for you to be to the point and show objectivity in your behavior. The internet brings within it new ethical challenges. So if this is the case that you are collecting data using internet technology, then what kind of challenges you can get? They called it netiquette because it is internet, so instead of etiquette they called it netiquette. When you want to collect data using online questionnaires, what kind of ethical issues you get because you don't know or you're not in direct contact with the respondents you want to collect data on. So what kind of issues arise, what are specific ethical issues that are concerns to you and to the respondents. They make big challenges for the new era in internet questioning or online survey and these kind of things. So ethical issues across various stages of research we have already discussed that for each stage of research, for example formulating research topic, for example designing research, access to and collecting data, processing and storing data, analyzing and interpreting data, there are ethical issues, and which comes down to researchers' right to absence of coercion by sponsors, gatekeepers and participants' right to privacy, confidentiality, anonymity and being informed, sponsors, participants' right to quality research. So whatever kind of research you do, you have to do a quality research based on the access to data, so that you can inform them that this is the kind of research that you were proposing. Based on their data, you have done this or that kind of analysis and interpreted, and this is the report or research paper or dissertation you have come out with. So confidentiality and anonymity, we have already discussed that informants' confidentiality and anonymity should be ensured. Participants' right to privacy, their information, their names, their identity should remain private. And that's one of the important thing when we talk about ethical issues of research at various stages. Consent. Consent is also an important and crucial element. Gaining consent from a participant is crucial. So asking, as we have discussed in ethical issues, that you have to ask voluntarity in participation, whether they want to participate or not. So if they say yes, their consent is there. If you just deceive them by asking question without informing the objective of your presence and objective of your research, and definitely the consent is not there, and that leads us on unethical behavior. One can distinguish between lack of consent, which may lead to feeling of deception that we have already discussed, and implied consent, such as returning a filled out questionnaire. Implied consent means that you didn't ask him or her or the respondent that whether he is ready or not, but you hand over a questionnaire that one has to fill or not to fill. If they fill out the questionnaire, then it means that their implied consent is there. So what they do, instead of you asking them whether they are ready or not, you give them questionnaire and they fill them up. And if that is the case, that is called implied consent, which is there. In the case of oral interviews, it may be appropriate or required to let the interview check the transcript of the interview before using it further. So if you are interviewing and you are writing his or her words in your own words, then before leaving that or at the end of the interview, just show the person you have interviewed that these are the things that you are going to explain while you quoting him or her, and if one agrees, then you will be in a position to publish that particular interview or the ideas that you have, and that's how you can actually get consent of the person you're interviewing. Issue: this may cause the interview to come back to earlier statements, especially if the summarized interviews are published. So this issue, the issue in this is that maybe some people start discussing things again and again, and it will become cumbersome. Oh, I didn't mean this, so you have to write this way. When you write this, oh, I think I didn't mean this or that. So it's kind of remain discussing, so it become lengthy. So try to write in a proper way so that people can become relaxed when or they make things understandable for themselves when they read their own arguments. Ethical issues during data collection. When you collect data, what kind of ethical issues you can have? Maintaining your objectivity can also be seen as an ethical principle. So you have to be objective in your data collection. This means making sure that you collect your data accurately and fully, avoiding subjective selectivity. So rather than you select things by yourself and you keep aside the sampling techniques, what you can do, you basically make sure that your data is collected accurately and fully. This also refers to the validity, whether the data collection or the sample or the way you are accessing an organization is valid or not. Accurate measurement and correct findings. And reliability. So these two things we have already discussed in sampling techniques also. Methods or techniques leads to consistent findings irrespective of the researcher. So you have to understand the validity and reliability of your research. Ethical issues with the data processing and storage. When you do data processing and when you do storing data, you have to be ethical. You don't have to change data to get your desired results. You don't have to do data mining. You don't have to do playing with data in a way that you add this or that kind of a specific number so that you can get the results of your personal choice. Researchers should be familiar with data protection legislature. So various organizations, various countries, especially industrialized countries, have legislatures, rules and law of data protection. They have Data Protection Act. For example, if in Europe, in Germany or in France or Netherlands, you are giving an information according to the European Data Protection Act or country's particular Data Protection Act, your data cannot be shared with other organizations unless you sign within the questionnaire that you allowing the organization to share your data with other organization within the country or within European Union. So for these things they have separate Data Protection Act. So data processing and storage is also an ethical issue, where and how you store data and how it helps you to be ethically correct. Greater precaution is necessary when you are dealing with so-called sensitive personal data such as racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious and other beliefs, trade union membership and like. So confidentiality matters when you have sensitive or sensitive nature data with you. So the access to data, processing of data and storage become more ethically important when you have sensitive personal level data. Ethical issues related to analysis and reporting. So you are looking now that on every stage of research you have ethical issues involved, and if you don't care for these ethical issues, they will bias your research, or that your behavior will become unethical, and that will create issues for your research to be publicly acceptable. So that's how you have to see each and every step of research and ethical framework also. So we have also seen when you collect data what kind of ethical issues you have while storing data, analyzing data and reporting data. If an individual organization in the data can be identified, there can be a great deal of embarrassment. So you don't have to make organizations embarrassed who have allowed you access to data. So this is how you have to manage things in a nice way. While following, researchers can be denied any opportunity to do research. Maybe that can harm the other researcher who want to access to that organization. Based on your research, the organization might not allow other researchers to come and gain access to data within that particular organization. Before publishing names, etc., it stands to reason that prior permission will be asked, which is already discussed, that if you are publishing name of an organization or an individual, you have to take permission. If you're not taking permission, definitely it's going to be unethical. Often organization allowing you to use their data are given a draft final report and asked to give it comment. So for organization, you are gaining access to data, they ask you to provide a draft report so that they can also comment on that, and they can also give their opinion to you, so that you can also add in the final report. Rather than having access to final report, some organization asked that you've informed that in the early stages of your draft report, so that they can also have some comments or suggestions for the report. And that's how you have to tell them whether your organization allows you to do that or not. And if you are going to do that, you have to follow it fully and ethically. The same level of care is needed in making sure that the anonymity of individual is maintained. Whoever gives you access to data or information, you have to keep that person's anonymity intact, so that it should not be loosened, it should not be publicly available, which should not create or could not create embarrassment for that particular individual. Today we have discussed ethical issues, and I want to summarize that this is one of the very important aspects of the research, that we have to be ethically correct. First, we have discussed about access to data. Then we have discussed about what is ethics, what are its important elements, what are the true views on ethics, what are the ethical issues at various stages of research. And we have seen that access to data or gaining access to data is also an important ethical aspect of your research. When you are planning your research objectives and questions, you have to understand that access to data is going to be a problematic thing. How you are going to analyze the data that you need for your research. Before analysis, you have to understand how you are going to access to the data that you need. If you need institutional affiliation, do you have institutional affiliation for that or not? If you need an institutional letter for that, will your supervisor be agree to write it, or your departmental head will be agree to write for that? If you can have access to these things, so that you can go to the organization, you visit the organization and you tell them that you are a researcher, you want to do this or that kind of research, and you want to have access to this or that kind of information and data, whether you will be allowed or not. So by the time you are setting your research questions and objectives, you also have to have in your mind about the kind of data that you are going to use, or a rough idea of what kind of data you are going to use, whether it is at organizational level, what kind of organization you are going to visit, why, and whether you will be allowed to have access to information within organization or not. This is how we deal with gaining access to data. Whether we can have access to data or not actually determines the further steps in our research. If we cannot have access to data, how do we deal with the issue of data while you are analyzing your research? First, we have talked about gaining access, and within gaining access we have discussed various things. And second, we have talked about what is ethics, what are two views on ethics, and what are the ethical issues? Some of the important ethical issues is that your behavior counts a lot. When you're collecting personal level, individual level data using your own questionnaire or survey method, you have to be polite, smooth and ethically correct so that you can have access to information from individuals you want to get information to. This is one very important aspect or very basic aspect of conducting research. Social norms, customs, values, cultural context you have to keep in mind. That is very important ethically. If you keep in mind social norms and cultural context, that will definitely help you to be ethically correct when you are asking questions of sensitive nature. Secondly, individual's identity should be hidden unless they ask you to show their names or photos, or they show their consent that their photos or names can be published in the report or research paper or dissertation. You are not allowed ethically to publish their name or research photos within a research report. So these few things you have to keep in mind, and definitely when you have access to organization, you definitely try to establish your networks with old network connections. Also you try to organize some new contacts. Based on old and new contacts, you will be in a good position to gain access to as much data as you can. But before gaining access to any information and data, you have to tell them what is the objectives of your research, what is the research question that you are trying to answer, why you are trying to answer that research questions, and why you are exploring these kind of research objectives, and what benefits that research can bring in for that particular organization you want to get data from, or in particular area from where you are interviewing individuals. So this is how you will be in a good position actually to make your case more polite, more strengthened, and more fundamentally founded on ethical basis. If that is not the case, you will definitely be lacking ethical ground for your research. And if this is the case, you will have to consider many times before publishing your research that does it make any sense for those who are involved, number one. Number two, is it personally unbiased? Does it include personal bias in it because you didn't consider the ethical framework while you're doing research? If this is the case, you have to see things in perspective and retrospective. So these are some important aspects, and then we have discussed deontological and teleological aspects of ethical views. So deontological and teleological have already discussed, and then we have discussed ethical issues on various research stages. When you are writing for to get access to information, you have to get a letter, for example, from your authorities, supervisor or dean or head of the department, and in that letter it is also ethical to clearly explain the objectives of your research, what is the title of your research, what is the research question that you want to answer, why you are interested in that particular topic, and what helps does that particular research will bring for the organization you want to work for or you want to get data for. And will you be in a position to discuss results and report of your results with the organization when it is at final stages or after publishing? So these are also two different things that you have to keep in mind, whether you are going to discuss your research results when they are at draft stages or when it is already published. These things you have to keep in mind before you go and collect data. So these things are already mentioned in your letter. Once you have written the letter, you have get it signed from your department head or supervisor, then you go to the organization, and we have also discussed that personal willingness to visit an organization is also an important aspect to get access to data, and it is also ethically correct so that you can have access to the required data set or information that you need to. And at writing stages, you have to tell whether you can publish their names or not, whether you have to show their identity or you have to show them anonymous. You have to get consent of the interviewee or the individuals you want to get information. These are some of the steps or some of the things that you have to keep in mind while you are discussing ethics in research. Why we have discussed ethics in research at this stage? Because of the two obvious reasons. Number one, in last two lectures we have discussed sampling techniques that is mainly used to collect first-hand information, and that is primary data. Secondly, nowadays it is growing concern of organizations and agencies that people come, they do research, they go back, and after that they never come up, they never appear, they never show up what they did in their research, what kind of research results they get, and where their research is published or not. What do we learn from the research activity they have done? So to make things clear in your mind as graduate students, that you have to have an ability to write effectively, at least an executive summary rather than sending the full dissertation. If organizations are interested, those who have provided you information, tell them that if not full dissertation, you will be in a position to share your executive summary of the research results, so that organization can also have access to your research work. And if they are interested and they need full copy, then they can also get access to full copy of that. But these things you have to discuss beforehand so that there is no unclarity of objectives between a researcher and the organization on which he or she is researching. That is one thing. Secondly, with the growing age of internet, emailing, social media and all, there is a lot of research that is nowadays going on social media, on internet. And we have discussed that we have had a new word called netiquette. Instead of etiquette, we have netiquette. So what are the ethical issues involved when we do some research on internet, online, using webs? So because your research interviewee or the individual or the organization you want to have access to or you want to collect data from are not in front of you. You just prepare a questionnaire, you put it online and you share it with the organization you are interested to collect information. So what kind of ethical issues that kind of analysis bring for you, you have to keep in mind also. We are not discussing that ethical issues of internet or online research because it is yet to be established that it's going to be a growing market or it's going to be a growing share of research. But in developing countries like Pakistan, where internet access is relatively difficult, people become reluctant to use internet surveys, especially in rural areas or areas where internet access is not much strong. So this is how things become easy or difficult. Whether online surveys are making things easy, definitely your time is saved, it is very efficient. I mean, even if you go to Karachi by an aeroplane, it takes you 2 hours, but if you send an email, it might take few seconds. And if your respondents are active, you might get things done sitting in Islamabad, within Karachi or Gilgit-Baltistan for few hours. But if you have to go in person, then definitely it will take time. And at the same time, 100 people or 200 or 300 people can have access to your research question and they can fill it up. While when you go physically, you might not have access to 300 people within a day because you can get tired, you don't have much time, or you are time constrained and things like that. So we have to see things in perspective and retrospective, that There is an online survey which can also be used to collect information, but there are ethical issues involved in it. Secondly, there is a survey in which you have to have physically present within an organization, or various ethical issue are relatively more, because these are the things that we lack, especially during our graduate or undergraduate research. And if we don't start from the beginning within research methodology course, focusing on ethical issues will definitely lead to an unethical behavior as a researcher, which is not a quality thing to do. So what we can do basically is to start inheriting this culture of ethical behavior within research framework from the very beginning. And that's the right time when you're doing graduate level research, that you have to start think ethical issues when you do your research. And ethical issues does not come only when you are using primary data, but they will also come when you are using secondary data. So you have to keep balance of what kind of data, what kind of analysis you are doing. For example, if you are using GDP or credit or stock market data and your results are not coming up to the mark, you have access to data, so you might change numbers to get your results in your favor, and that's ethically not correct. So what you can do is you basically report the results that you get with the correct data rather than modified data, and that's also unethical if you do modification within the original data which is already there. So this is how primary data has ethical consideration, secondary data has ethical consideration, and data that you can get online or using websites. So these things, as a researcher, from the very beginning you have to keep in mind. And from the very beginning, I mean that when you are deciding your research questions and topic and also your objectives, you have to keep in mind what kind of data needs your objectives can have, how you will fulfill that needs, whether you need any ethical ground for that, whether you can fulfill that ethical ground or not, and whether the whole research is ethically framed or not. And if your answer is yes in favor of ethically framed, then you will be in a good position to actually start your research, and you can go ahead because your research is ethically sound and it can be conducted on ethical basis. Why it is important? Because we are living in a human society where consent with consensus is very important thing. I stop here. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you in next lecture.